Hi everyone, welcome to a Astra Militarum Old Codex review. This is the 8th edition book, printed back in 2017, and at this point I just got into 40k from a tabletop game point of view. This book was actually in use for 5 years. It took 5 years before 9th edition, one of the last armies to get a 9th edition codex, and then of course about 9 months after that, 10th edition was released, so it was a bit of a weird phase in the sense this book was in circulation for a long time. Its replacement was only in circulation for 9 months, and now in 10th edition we're still using an index, which basically means we have no official codex. Right, so let's go through this. It's a relatively comprehensive document, and having looked over it just quickly before, there's a lot of lore in here, and it gets quite deep into things. And I do think this was the last, well, definitely 9th edition, the codex was nowhere near as in depth as this book is. So I'll go through it at a relatively quickish pace because there's a lot to get through. But yeah, I think about probably 3/4 of the book, maybe, or maybe 60% of the book is dedicated to lore and or miniature showcases. And it's really cool to see at 2017 what was considered the cutting edge as far as miniatures were concerned. So let's get into it. So one other point to make is actually it's structured from a rules point of view. When I get to it, it's quite confusing. I remember when I got into this back in, I think 2018, I remember flicking through this thing going, where on earth do I start? Because there seems to be, when we get into this part here, there's like rules all over the place, and I'll explain that in a second. You can see here basically it talks about, you've got a big old section that's what, 71 pages-ish of actual description from a lore point of view. There's then 10 pages of actually showing off miniatures. The remaining part of the book then being dedicated to rules. So maybe probably more 50-50 could we argue. But yeah, so there's definitely some cool stuff in here. And I will move through this, as I said, quite quickly. But you can see some of these illustrations are classics. Now, I don't know if this was a new illustration at the time, but this is an absolutely classic illustration. Obviously, a commissar working with the Acadians with piles of their dead comrades, and obviously a tech priest of the Mechanicus assisting, being supported by some glorious Imperial knights. So a very classic scene there. So getting quite into it, and this, as I said, gets into a lot of detail, how everything from the ground level of the Astra Militarum through to the organisational structure, the senior level, at a top level, command level, it gives you all of the details. So I think here it's quite interesting. Basically, it breaks down the fact that you've got the Adeptus Ministratum, Astra Militarum, and the Commissariat is separate. We all know that. But the Astra Militarum is broken into 5 areas, being the Regimentus, which I believe is the standard regiments, the Tempestis, the Tempestus Scions, Auxilia, which will be the Rattlings, Bulgrams, and Ograms. Ordinatus, I think, is, I don't know what the Ordinatus is, and then I don't actually know what the Militarum Vedorum is. So if you do know, let me know, because I did try to read for and find out what those two are, what that and that is, but I couldn't actually work out what the Verdurdum was. Vendorum, Militarum Vendorum. It goes into basically recruitment, and basically talks about how it's a completely varied sort of recruitment process across different worlds. And does talk to the fact that it could be from a very harsh world where people live in basically the jungles or the catagens or severe criminal underworlds and hive worlds, through to like the upper class elite worlds where people join the military or the Astra Militarum from a posh boy point of view. Okay. Yeah, then talks about basically this. Now this is interesting in the sense it talks about platoons. Now, I'm ex-military, I was in the army years ago, and this actually looks like more of a almost company-ish size. You've got, no, not company-ish, but it's basically, would be almost, well, I mean, you've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 infantrymen, and then you've got, it says, may include up to 3 special weapons, 5 heavy weapon squads, and 1 conscript squad. So conscript is 20, that's 70. You've then got their groups of 5, that's 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 45, 40, 50, 100, 100. Yeah, that's a company, because a modern day company is, that's 3 platoons of 30, gets to about 100. So it's almost like, simple math is that Astra Militarum platoon is basically a company size in modern day Western military structures. So that's why obviously the platoon commander and his command squad is quite comprehensive. And then that means a company commander has got a lot of men and women underneath his command. So that's, as I said, that's 150-ish, 100 sort of troops. So that's a lot. That's a lot of people on the ground, which definitely gets into the old school mentality. The Astra Militarum was almost like a wave of never-ending bodies being pushed into the breach, in inverted commas. Yeah, it talks about the Ministorum. I think it's cool in here. Basically, talks how like the Ministorum obviously is vital for the logistics of war, but I think it does say somewhere that, like, you know, it's such a bureaucratic nightmare that you may have like a request for aid being issued, but then like it only gets registered or processed by a clerk in some faraway place 10 years later, and they send like a fighting force like 3 years light travel to go to a world and it's just like desolate and no one's left. Or I think I've read in a couple of books, it's cool, where they'll get like a supply drop, and the supply drop is like, you know, toothbrushes and combs as opposed to like bullets and ammunition. So that's interesting. This then talks about regimental organisation, and this feels a bit more familiar from a modern day point of view. So you've got 3 companies, then supported by differing individuals. So that's interesting. So a regiment would have 3 Ogrim squads under a commissar. For example, Commissar Raven. You've then got 9 Weird Vein Psychers. That's a blast from the past. 83 Preachers from the Ministorum, and 101 Menials, and 18 Commissars under a senior commissar. This is an example of a layout, but it's saying that, so for 3 companies, you've got 18 Commissars. That's more than 1 per platoon, and 83 Preachers. Jesus. They're going to be very indoctrinated as they go into battle. So that's interesting. And then obviously also tank platoons. And I think if we go back, I was never a tanky, but this feels a bit more realistic in the sense that an armoured company is what would be almost today. Would that be an armoured platoon? I think armoured platoon is 3 tanks, including a tank commander in modern day tank structures. But that's a company. And it's basically saying, yeah, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this feels a bit more sort of in line with modern day standards, but again, this feels quite heavy. You know, 5 infantry squads to 5 squads to a platoon. It's typically 3 squads to a platoon these days, and then the heavy weapon teams are attached to the company level formation, not the platoon level. You can have individuals with heavy weapons in modern day armies, but they're typically more what you might classify as a medium direct fire weapon, such as a Mag 58 or a GPMG. Okay, then it gets into the Galaxy of War. Now, I always get lost in this because I'm listening to the Horus Heresy and I just don't know what's going on. But I think the key one here, you got, there's Catagen, interesting. Okay, there's Terra. So Catagen's not too far. I mean, I can never make sense of these things, to be honest. But that's interesting. I'm trying to spot if we can see any others, like, I don't know, Cadia. Where's Cadia? Oh, Mordian. Interesting. Mordian. Catagen. Riser, I believe, is a Forge World. Oh, there's Talaran. Okay. Yep, cool. Okay, what's next? Okay, into the good stuff. So now she talks about the regiments, and this is where it gets very detailed. And this was definitely, compared to 9th, you had the real depth of Astra Militarum. Every single named regiment was given a lot of love in the book. So this talks about the Cadians. We won't go into detail because you will know about the story of the fall of Cadia. But this is definitely cool. You've got different uniform types for the Cadians beyond just sort of the drab brown and the green, the classic Cadian layout. So you've got a couple of different options. Then the Catechins, and again, gives you a bit more detail about sort of like the individual regiments and their specific uniforms, including a tank commander, and some hard ass with a Catechin blade, or Catechin fang it should be called, tattooed. Then Armageddon, super cool. And as you probably know, there were metal miniatures. They're now discontinued, no longer available, and they probably go on eBay for way too much money. Vestroya, which were basically moustache-wearing guys with like the bearskin British hats. They were metal miniatures, which are now discontinued. Yeah, Valhalla, the Ice War dudes, and they definitely were very cool, like the traditional sort of Soviet approach to warfare, albeit unfortunately today's approach even, which is waves of dudes going into battle. Again, they had their own dedicated metal miniatures, and across all of the ones I've named so far, I do remember seeing when I was young, well, before I got into the hobby, that you had like complete options. You had heavy weapon teams, you had infantry squads, you had command squads, you had all these different miniatures to support the individual regiments. Same as Talaran, the Desert Raiders. They had a complete set of miniatures as well, including like their own specific tank commanders, because being quite desert orientated fighters, they were known as for their hit and run attacks, so very sort of nimble. And then these were then basically additional ones, which at this point obviously didn't have their own miniatures. So I never, obviously this is the Armageddon Orc Hunters, the Athian Tunnel Rats, the Mizian Red Cows, Mordian Iron Guard. They had their own miniatures at some point, but no longer do they did. At this point, I believe. Tanner First and Only, led by Commissar Gaunt. Amazing set of books to listen to, and obviously now we're very lucky that we've got the plastic Gaunt's Ghost to use. So that's very nice to see they sort of been brought back, because there was a original metal set of the Gaunt's Ghosts, and now there's a plastic set, then Salva Chem Dogs. So again, interesting that there's even more depth to look at, and obviously had their own miniatures here, and then as we go over, there's even more. So the I'm dyslexic sometimes. Ventrilian Nobles, the Indigan Prefectus, Mordant Acid Dogs, Feyburn Vanquishers, Tuscan Snowhounds, and the Vresh Grenadiers. So as we'll get into the miniature section, you can see they kit bash this type of thing, and I've definitely seen Instagram and social media people kit bash these type of things, the Salva Chem Dogs, because it is relatively easy to kit back if you're just wearing a respirator. So again, a lot of detail. Not only do you have the official, in inverted commas, regiments given like specific, 1 or 2 pages of explanation about the way they wage war and their history and their honours, but then you even get a couple more of what you could call, say, the lesser known regiments, which didn't have specific miniatures, to basically explore and sort of build your own adventure as we get into the rules as well in a second. So, right, then this goes through this is the beginning of, this will be after the Horus Heresy. Yes, just after the Horus Heresy through to modern day 40k, which I believe at this point was the end of the 40th century, I believe. 40th millennium, not century. So it goes through all this. Interesting, it talks about obviously Valhalla, Cadia stands, Armageddon, Fall of Cadia. Okay, interesting. Yes, so a lot of detail here. And then we get into, I believe now, oh gosh, we've got more to go. But again, a classic illustration here. The mighty Cadians again. Looks like you actually got here. That looks like Kazrakin, which is interesting because they don't exist in this edition. Got platoon command squad being led by a Sergeant Bannerbearer with a power fist. So looks like Creed back there, staying on the back of a Chimera transport vehicle, or some sort of massive drop ship here. So some absolutely beautiful illustrations that we can sort of get into. Okay, now this is interesting, and I won't go through all of it, but every single unit in the book has got its own dedicated page of lore. So that's what makes this book quite detailed. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these, but there's a lot here to absorb, and it definitely was fun to read through how they got really into the detail here. This was definitely and I don't know what the recent codexes are like, because I haven't seen a 10th edition book, because I haven't had to buy one because I don't have one, but everything is explained. So the infantry squads, and what's interesting here compared to 10th edition is that the infantry squad captures all of the different regiments. And now you have obviously infantry squads, Cadian shock troops, Death Corps of Krieg, and then also Cadian shock. But now the infantry squad at this point basically was any of the regiments, and as we'll look at a bit later, the regiments had their own specific rules. So a bit confusing, but this was just the way it was done. So infantry squads, heavy weapon teams, special weapons squads, no longer available. Veterans, no longer available. So these were definitely interesting. And I think at the beginning of 8th edition, or when this book was launched, I think Guard were actually in a pretty good place from a rules point of view. But definitely it sort of fell off a cliff, and then, this book was in use for a long time, and Guard went through some pretty dark periods where our rules just basically sucked. But yeah, I can't remember. I'm trying to think if these. I think veterans were decent. They had a lot of DACA. They basically were like a substitute for Kazrakin, as we'll look in a moment. And special weapon squads were basically 3 special weapon gunners and 3 supporting troops. So they were snipers, flamers, grenade launchers, melters, or plasmas as well. So they're 2 relics of the past. Okay, the Chimera, Crimea, whatever you want to call it. The Taurox Prime. It's interesting to see that this has been around for quite a while. And I think the Scions, they obviously were released before this, but they're relatively recent. I think they're probably within the last 15 years. So Sentinels, and here they do talk about armored and scout Sentinels. The Hellhounds, and this is interesting. Again, this is all ancient now, but there actually are 3 variants of the Hellhound. The Hellhound Primary, which is the Flame Bus, the Devil Dog, which is basically the Melter Cannons, and the Bane Wolves are the Chem Cannon. So you can play all 3 variants now. It doesn't actually call them that, just calls them Hellhounds, but you change the weapon type. But these were specific individual units with their own specific main shooter, which is interesting. And they all had different points, I'm pretty confident. Okay, interesting, they call ordnance batteries as basilisks and wyverns. Now we'll look at the idea of a battery a bit later in the rules, but this was a bit of a unique setup for Astra Militarum. Actually, no, a lot of armies had this, but we'll get to that. Hydras, they're still here, albeit the rules are a bit crap. Manticores, Death Strike, and this is cool. You can read through how basically like how the Manticore, correction, the Death Strike is actually highly unreliable, and it takes loads of like tech priest to hum and pray to it to make sure the thing actually fires. But when it does fire, like the devastation it causes is just like wild. Although the shame is the rules even at this point didn't support that. They did support this in 9th edition when our book came out, but then we lost the book about 7 months later. Limit Rust battle tanks. So this is no change. You can play all these variants today. Obviously the Demolisher Cannon is the craziest. And then interestingly, you've got things like the Punisher, which I think was crap at this point, still crap. Eradicator's not too bad at this point, quite effectively, and the Vanquish is super cheap. But yeah, so the variants have been around for a while, and I believe, and I don't know when they departed, and basically, no, I think we've always had Demolisher siege cannons. I think it goes back to like 2nd edition. So loads of stuff there. Then super heavy tanks. Okay, now again, gives you all the detail explaining all of the 8 variants. So yeah, I always forget there's 8 variants. There's a lot, and that's where they talk about the Octoblade. So if you magnetize this, you can basically build all of them via magnets, and I've done that for mine. So I don't play it much. I play relatively competitively, and basically in the most of the maps I play in, which are more the competitive scene, there's just too much terrain, and this thing just gets stuck in one spot and can't shoot much. But an absolutely glorious model, and relatively decent. Well, I don't know if you call them decent, but okay. Now on to the named characters. So Lord Castellan Creed and Colour Sergeant Kell were 2 distinct miniatures. Colour Sergeant Creed was a metal miniature, and Creed was a fine cast resin miniature. Both have been discontinued, and now you can basically play his daughter, Lord Castellan Ursula Creed, his daughter, who actually wears his coat and also his pistol. So that's pretty cool. As much as the miniature looks a bit strange, in some people's opinions, it's cool to see that his name is continued for his daughter. Unfortunately, Colour Sergeant Kell died. I think he was strangled to death by Horus Abaddon the Despoiler, but that miniature's gone. Knight Commander Pask was also a specific miniature, a metal miniature plonk in the top of the turret of the Demon Rust battle tank, also discontinued. And we'll look at that in a second from a rules point of view. All right, Colonel Ironhand Strachan and Gunnery Sergeant Harker, both still in existence, both metal miniatures, both probably 20 plus years old. So, yeah, Colonel Ironhand Strachan, from today's rules point of view, really hits quite hard for what you pay for him. He's a very effective combat beat stick. And then Gunnery Sergeant Harker is only about 40 points in today's rules, but his rules are okay, but he's not amazing. So that's cool. Okay. All right, Warriors of the Faith. You've got the Priests and you've got the Crusaders. So we had Crusaders once with specific miniatures, little metal guys with a shield and a sword. Now discontinued. Tech Breeze Engine Series and Servitors. Now I think you can still play them, can't you? Servitors and Tech Priest Engine Series, but I think even at this point the rules were crap, and they're still crap. The only good thing with the Tech Priest and 10th edition rules is you can give your vehicle an invul save, but at this point you can see there's a lot of options. There's like a lot of stuff to pick at. Quite a few named characters, and quite a lot of units. So Tempestus Scions, the Valkyries, which were basically the drop shits for most of the signs, but also the rank and file if they got lucky enough they're not sort of ground pounding and walking everywhere. So you had Commissars, Lord Commissars, and Commissar Yarrick. So an amazing miniature, an amazingly cool story. Now discontinued, as you know. I have the metal miniature from the mid-90s, and actually this one was a fine cast miniature, which actually looked pretty decent. It's actually quite a nice looking miniature. It's a shame it was discontinued. And as you know, you may know, now you can only play Commissars. There is no Lord Commissar, there is no Commissar Yarrick, it's just the Commissars. Yeah, so some fantastic rules here, and some interesting lore there. It's then Ogrims and Bolgrams, Ogrim Bodyguards, and Naught Dead Dog. Now this is a really cool sort of explanation of Naught Dead Dog. He basically is like remotely intelligent, he can count to 5. And it's a super cool sort of story here, which I read a couple of words, but it's like, Nork, don't let it take me. These are the last words screamed by Brigadier Alias Van Bruven before he was enveloped by the Maluk's razor-toothed maw. Charging to defend the screaming officer, Naught Dead Dog slammed his dense forehead into the serpentine's beast jaw. One of its colossal mandibles cracked under the force of the blow, and the Tyranid let out a jagged, muscular screech. From within its gullet came the desperate cries of Alarius. Muffled by the slabs of Xenos flesh that shrouded him, only the monster's head protruded from the hole from which it had burrowed. Yet it still towered above Nork. And basically Nork gets in there, rips out the unconscious Brigadier and puts him on his shoulder and marches back. In his mind, his job is done. So really cool to basically, I love anything about the Bolgrams and Ogrims. I think they're a part of they're like orcs. They've got a kind of humorous approach to them. They're not very intelligent, but they're exceptionally loyal and happily die for the Emperor. So super cool to see that. These big boys and girls. Rattling snipers. The metal miniatures are still in use today and don't look too bad, actually, the metal miniatures. The Rattlings. Primaris Psychers. Again, still in circulation. Their rules are pretty good today. Weird Vein Psychers. They were 3 metal miniatures you could buy. It looked a bit weird. And their rules are always a bit strange. I don't think they're really that good at any point, from what I know. And Regimental Advisors, now known today as Regimental Attachés. So that's interesting. Okay. Got through all that. So you can see they do give, if you were relatively lore inclined, you could really sink your teeth into understanding the story, the story for each of the individual regiments, the individual units, and the overall battle structure of the Astra Militarum under the command of the Adeptus Ministratum. Not Ministratum, Ministratum. Stratum. Okay. Yes. Okay. So there's a lot there to go through if you really want to get into from an understanding point of view, and I definitely think compared to the 9th edition book, there's more sort of depth given on the individual regiments. Now, okay, so it gets into the model showcase. This is quite nice. It's quite nice to do this, actually. So you can see there's Mr. Creed, which is lovely. You can also see his bodyguard, Colour Sergeant Kell, Jaron Kell. You've then got Colonel Ironhand Strachan and Commissar Yarrick, which, as I said, is a pretty cool looking miniature. even at this point. Right, so the Cadians, and you can see, yeah, so you can see a Lord Commissar. They need a Commissar, and I think the book, it doesn't show off, because if you've been watching Guard for quite a few years, 10 odd years, there's been so many different Commissar sculpts. Now there's even a newer one where this chap has been retired. I think he's got a sword poking in the ground with a pistol pointing off in the distance. So that admittedly is quite a nice looking miniature. This is the old. Now what I mean by old is now you obviously have the Cadian specific miniatures, but for all of us who've been playing for quite a while, this was a standard sculpt for a long time. This sort of style here with just the basic of the carapace armor. So this was a command squad. It was actually one of the first kits I bought, which I really enjoyed. And you can see some of the other guys, and the Tech Breeze engine steer still in circulation. You then had the bodyguards, and this individual here is actually from a Baneblade kit. So if you don't know, you can actually get that. You get that in the Baneblade kit. So interesting, they put that here basically as an infantry officer. Okay, what else we got now? Yeah, I think almost at this point they probably knew they were going to discontinue some of the other regiments, because only some get sort of a nod. So obviously the Jungle Fighters still in existence today. You can still buy the miniatures. They're bloody ancient, but they're awesome. And I think a lot of this down here is kit bashed, because that comes from the Command Squad box. You can still buy today, but I don't know. Maybe you can. I think you can still buy that somewhere, but I think like that's kit bashed. That's definitely kit bashed, and that's definitely kit bashed. Right, so a bit of a nod to the Talaran Desert Raiders, the Valhallans, and these are very old miniatures. And then you've got Tank Commander Old Mate Steers' Cadian Armoured Battle Group for the Overground Ruins, and this also is some nice kit bash work. Got some chaps sitting on the side of the vehicle. Obviously today you got the Rogel Dawn kit. You got some super cool miniatures that you can put on the side, and also there's actually the modern day Cadian accessory sprue, which is very, very nice to see. But you can see the Talarans get a bit of a nod, the Valhallans, and then so this is cool actually, because then so there's the Scions, and then here, this is actually really big for me, is this is the 122nd Castcraft Jackal. So the colour scheme I've used on all my Guard infantry for the last 5 years comes from this page here. So the red shoulder guards, the black armour, and the I don't do the dashes. I do the spotty white and black on the blue. But this basically has inspired me for the last 5 years. Not 5 years, more than that, or 5 or 6 years maybe. For the colour scheme from my army has been the Castcraft Jackals. And I can't find much information about them besides this basically point here. Okay, then these are what they have illustrated as kit bash jobs. You can see the Chem Dogs. Interesting, the Mordians at this point. So this means at this point, the Mordians no longer had their specific metal miniatures, which is a bummer. The Ventrilian noblemen, and I believe these are Age of Sigmar helmets, and they just make them look like little fancy posh boys. So that's cool, albeit they didn't have any of their own rules. Some of the Vestroyan. Now these are ancient miniatures, and you can get them on eBay and you pay an absolute fortune because they arguably look absolutely awesome. And this is just a snippet of what was available, because I know there's quite an extensive kit. Okay, now we get on to actually sort of setting up from a gameplay point of view. So this mustering for war, these were basically two kits you could buy. So you can still buy this kit here, which gives you the old school Commissar, Taurox, and two Scion Squad and a Command Squad. And this was an old battle box in inverted commas, one of the first kits I bought. So you had 10 Guardsmen, Heavy Weapon Team, Commissar, and a Limonras Battle Tank. So these were the starter sets that are available at this point in time. Okay, a bit of more, loads of miniatures to show off, really inspiring you to go spend loads of money and paint loads of miniatures, which I've definitely done over the years. And now we get into the rules. So, okay, so from an overall point of view, you could arguably say that 40k has remained largely the same at a top line level, yeah? However, as soon as you start to scratch the surface, a lot of stuff, the way the game was played was very different. And at this point, I think one thing to definitely say that there were set army structures you had to play to. You had basically a battalion, which was a headquarter unit, and 3 what they called what's essentially today battle line units. You had to play that, or you could attach different styles of detachments, like a spearhead, which was mainly armor. There was one about which was speed, so you could play fast attack vehicles. And as we go through all the units, you'll see they've all got different nominations, versus today just got battle line, characters, epic characters, and all others in inverted commas. Now it was quite technical setting up an army in 8th edition. There was quite a few requirements, and a lot of units had specific restrictions. But also there was benefit if you had multiple detachments. It generated more command points for you. So the command point generation in 8th edition was completely different to 10th edition, where basically you and your opponent are pretty much even, except for a couple of key units with abilities that can generate new additional command points. So the order structure, again, largely the same. However, at this point there was no command phase. There was only issued in the infantry phase. Now, infantry units that within 6 inches of the regiment keyword, just like today, could issue 6 orders. Take aim, which was reroll 1s to hit, not +1. First rank fire, second rank fire, which changed all hotshot lasguns and lasguns to rapid fire 2. So lasguns and hotshot lasguns. So a restriction versus today, which can influence obviously plasma weapons. Bring it down. So real wound rolls of 1. We have nothing like that today. Forward for the Emperor. Forwards for the Emperor. You can shoot this phase even if it's advanced. Don't have that anymore. Get back in the fight. They can shoot even if they fell back. Move, move, move. Now this was a classic of Guard in addition. I think there was plenty of memes about it. Is that, given it's in the shooting phase, you could move your units and then you could move them again. And instead of shooting this phase, the order unit immediately moves as if it was the movement phase. It must advance as part of the move and cannot declare a charge during this turn. So you're basically getting the minimum of 13-inch move, because I believe you have to roll a dice for advance. You could be moving up to 18 inches, because you moved 6 in the previous movement phase, move again, and then advance. So you could get a lot of distance out of your guardsmen, which is a lot more than you can today. And fixed bayonets. Now this is interesting. So the order unit can be issued. The order can be issued to units that are within an inch of enemy units. The order unit immediately fights as if it was the fight phase. So in the shooting phase, your guardsmen could be fighting, which is cool. So again, a lot of the stuff still exists. Reroll 1s to hit, not +1 ballistic skill, weapon skill. And there's a bit of duplication in the sense that a lot of this stuff has been removed. So that was what we call the army rule in inverted commas, was voice of command. You can even give orders. Now, then we get the interesting part from the different regiments, is that if you play different regiments, you've got different rules. So you could play Cadian, Catagen, Valaran, Vestroyan, Armageddon, Talaran, Militarum, Tempestus, and Mordian. So this was cool. So basically, Cadians, their ability was the extra order. Was a tank order. We could reroll the number of shots on the heavy D6 weapons, so you could basically get more shots out of your tanks. Catagens was basically when you use flamers and heavy flamers. You get to roll the number of shots, number of hits, and get the bonus of cover. Valaran, Valhallan was you could shoot enemy units that were within engagement range, or 1 inch of friendly units. But each time you roll a hit roll of 1, resolve that attack against friendly units. Yeah, so basically shoot into combat. But if you roll a hit roll of 1, you basically resolve that hit against your own blokes. Destroy and repel the enemy. Blah, blah, blah. I can't remember what it is. To the phase, or it can find a weapon while it's... Okay, so yeah, that basically means that all weapons were pistols. Interesting. Armageddon was something about basically you could embark into vehicles out of sequence. I believe Talaran, to get around behind them. So the order unit can move, it's a tank order, can move up to 6 inches this phase, either before or after it shoots, as if it was the movement phase. This does not affect... Okay, that's cool. So basically, you could fire and fade in inverted commas. Tempestus Scions, so you can reroll failed rerolls if targeting monsters or vehicles. And Morty, and this definitely was not that good, is that until the end of the phase, the ordinate unit can target characters or rapid-fire weapons, even if not the closest enemy unit. So, look out, sir, was a rule where basically the way the character was placed depended on how they were basically protected. Now, in 10th edition, if a character is by itself, it's targetable by everybody. So that is definitely a bit of a change. Now, yeah, so then there's a lot of units to go through, but you've got the Lord Castellan Creed. He's now been removed, but you can see his key thing at this point, trying to remember too well, is that if he was your warlord, you got 2 extra command points, full stop. So that was good. Company commander, and you can basically see that he can issue 2 orders just like today, albeit I think the Cadian Castellan, for example, which essentially replaced this, can issue 1 order. Then you got tank commanders and knight commander packs. Now the key difference between the two was simply that the ballistic skill of a tank commander was 3+, the ballistic skill of a tank commander Pask was a 2+. Yeah, so interesting, today tank commanders just have a 4+ ballistic skill, just like the other tanks. But in 8th edition, they were superior from an accuracy point of view, and they can also give tank orders. So the tank orders they can give us full throttle. Instead of shooting this phase, the order unit immediately moves if it's a movement phase. Basically move for a tank. Gunners kill on sight, reroll hit rolls of 1. So that was just like take aim. And strike and shroud, you can basically use smoke launchers. The order can, and also shoot your weapons as well. So in this edition, smoke launchers were on a vehicle. They were baked into the cost, and you can only use it once per game, as opposed to currently it's a stratagem where a vehicle can use smoke over and over again. But these were specifically built into the rules. Yeah, so then I did forget one part which was important, is grinding advance. Now this was to do with the Leman Russ battle tanks, do a number of shots. So let me read it here because this was pretty key. So allows it to keep like advance. It can shoot its weapon twice in the following shooting phase. Yeah. Yeah. So if you moved under half, you could shoot the main cannon twice. So you go from heavy D6 to heavy 2D6. That's right. Grinding advance. That's right. So it was a real trade-off of, if you did your full movement, you can only shoot a little bit. If you moved under half, you get loads of shots out. And as we look at that would stack quite well with, say, pound them to dust. We could re-roll the number of shots. So you could move under half, fire twice, re-roll the number of shots and get lots of shots out, albeit you're not moving as far. So let's not forget that. So grinding advance was definitely a rule. And you can see the way they lay this out. It's similar to 10th edition today. One thing to note is the toughness of vehicles at this point was nothing compared to what is, say, a Leman Russ today is a toughness 11. And in this edition, vehicles definitely didn't feel as durable as they do now. Like a plasma or a melter could definitely take down Leman Russ, versus today, they definitely can't reliably because they're wounding on 5s versus typically wounding on 4s or even 3s. So vehicles weren't as tanky as they were now. So, this denotes here the unit type. So I believe that is a headquarter unit. So you can see Commissar Yara, you can see Lord Commissar, you can come on Strachan, Tempressus Prime. Now Commissar Yarrick and the Lord Commissar, and also the Commissar in a moment, they're basically their jam was they were very, very accurate weapon skill 2+, so they're highly accurate, most accurate units in the book at this time. And we'll get into it also in the other Commissar, but this at the beginning of 8th, I think it got essentially nerfed, was summary execution. So Astra Militarum within 6 inches of the Commissar, never lose more than 1 model as a result of any failed morale tests. So if you read that carefully, that basically means you'd have conscript blobs of 20 standing there, and if you failed morale, which definitely felt more of a thing in 8th edition than in 10th, you only lose 1 model. So I think at the beginning of 8th, or when this book came out, like conscript blobs were the jam. You just sat them down on objectives, and then and this was in a time when I think like it was called OBSEC, which is now objective control value, was a very different setup. It was sort of unfairly placed in the sense you could have like just like one OBSEC guardsman holding an objective versus one non-OBSEC Imperial Knight. So it was a bit of a jam. And if you played the conscript spam, please tell me, because I didn't ever get to play it. So yeah, you can see Colonel Strachan, been there, seen it, killed it. That remains today. It's been a bit zhuzhed up. He gets to re-roll the wound roll against exactly the same actually, against monsters, which is cool. Exactly the same. Okay. Right, Primera Psyker. Okay, here. Then this was what is today battle line unit. So the infantry squad, as I said, the infantry squad captures all of the different regiment types. So Catagen, Def Corps, Krieg, infantry squads, and Cadian would be just under this rule set here. Now, what you can also notice is that when we move beyond the heroes or the characters, there's no unit abilities really. They've got like war gear abilities here for the Voxcaster. Okay, bad example, but conscripts at this point could be up to 20. And you can see weapon skill is a skill of 5+, leadership 4 versus a leadership of 7 for the sergeant and the infantry squad. So they're pretty scared. And then Royal Recruits rule was what only a 4+ can actually receive an order. So that was interesting. Is that they could only basically receive orders if they did a 4+, and they would typically farm morale. But if you had a commissar, as per the rules we saw before, you only lose one model. So this was the way that sort of thing worked. Right, Militarum Tempestus, and basically, again, it's interesting that from a 10th edition, the way things are written now is that every unit had basically their rules described in a different way. So this essentially is the term deep strike, 9 inches. And you can see they give a lot of fluff. During deployment, you can set up high altitude transport, ready to deploy via grab shoot instead of place on the battlefield. Blah, 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 blah. So basically it just means deep strike. That's it, deep strike. Cool. And then Voxcaster. So this, interestingly, basically allowed you to boost the order range by 18, not 24 like you can today with the Master Vox. Master Ordnance still exists. And this is interesting. Well, you can still play Platoon Commander. You've got Platoon Command Squad today. Then you got the individual Caddy and Castellan, for example. But at this point, the Platoon Commander was an individual model. He wasn't part of a specific command squad, and we'll get onto that in a second. Versus today, you've got a command squad, Platoon Command Squad. Okay, cool. Right, okay, then there's an individual command squad. So I think, I could be wrong, I think the character, I think the platoon commander was individual to the command squad. So you just have them like sat next to each other, I think. There was no like attaching units to stuff. I could be wrong, can't remember actually. But the command squad was 4 models by themselves. You'd have like a platoon commander nearby, a company commander, and then you could basically play shenanigans with the Voxcaster. You can see things like the regimental standard, add 1 to leadership within 6 inches. So not as good as it is now. And the med pack basically means, within 3 inches, an Astra Militarum infantry squad on a 4+1 model stands back up again. So, similar, not similar, but like at least you could actually save some guys. But I remember using this rule, and you'd be playing 5 or 6 turns in this point. That would be on average 3 models returned. So not as good as it is today. But the main thing with this, you could take loads of like good shooters. There's Colour Sergeant Kell. He was basically a bodyguard, so on a 2+. If Lord Castellan Cree was nearby, he takes a mortal wound instead of Castellan Cree taking a wound. Special Weapons Squad, the veterans, and the key thing was they had better ballistic skill, and they could take loads of different weapons. So up to 3 can take special weapons, 2 can form a heavy weapon team, 1 can take a heavy flamer. So you actually had quite a lot of DAC, heavy flamer, heavy weapon team, 3 special weapons. So quite a lot of shooters in there. So, maybe like the modern day Kazrakan. Obviously the Kazrakan rules are superior from a comparison point of view to these. But definitely these were sort of the heavier hitters from an overall point of view, but still super squishy. and just a scaredy cat as the other guys. And you will note the key thing is that in this edition, 8th edition, also 9th, I think, it was with a sergeant, had a higher leadership. So it actually was a reason to keep a sergeant, versus in today's rules, there's no point to keep the sergeant often, because often they have like crapper weapons. Okay, Sergeant Harker, and you can see like, I think he's got 2 or 3 rules now, but all he did at this point is get real hit rolls of 1 in the shooting phase for all friendly Catagen within 6 inches of Harker. So I actually used to play the Catagen detachment on purpose, and my artillery would be sat next to Sergeant Harker just for real ones to hit. Because getting real ones to hit on artillery at this point was actually quite hard, because your tank orders, because there was no way to send orders all over the place, they'd be off supporting other units, so you basically sit there buffing your artillery. Okay, and then it's the Militarum Tempestus Command Squad, no different to basically the normal Command Squad, albeit can deep strike. The Menastorum Priest still exists today, and actually the rules are relatively similar, actually. Additional attacks, and reroll failed hit rolls as well. So Crusaders, and these actually were really good little action monkeys. Like, not action monkeys because there were no actions in 8th edition, but they were quite durable. They get all over the place and do stuff and get in the way. So on a 2+, they perform an act of faith. They can immediately move as its movement phase. They can shoot, even though they didn't have any weapons. They can immediately fight and pile in, or they recover D3 wounds, which is pretty decent. Yeah, so that's interesting. That's a unit which is deleted now, obviously. Oh man, engine seers, what did they do? Oof. Oh, yep, they healed wounds, D3 wounds, just like they do today. Servitors, you can see, just like the recent rules, they couldn't hit very well. But I believe, yeah, so just like modern-ish rules, as if there was a tech presentancy nearby. Ballistic skill 4+, and leadership of 9. Ooh, leadership 9. Wow. The leadership 6 to 9. Okay, so that's pretty good. Pretty brave. Yeah, so there's the Commissar, Officer of the Fleet, and Weird Vein Psychers. So they're now discontinued. And in 8th edition, there was the psychic phase. So in between movement and shooting, there was a psychic phase. There was a specific phase in the game. And basically, if you didn't have any psychic units, you just watch your opponent roll dice and just move models and remove models. Because if you played like Thousand Suns or Grey Knights, they cast all these spells and stuff would die, and you'd just be taking models off the board and just nodding along. They've now removed that and changed it to a certain sort of specific extra rules within a unit's data sheet. But Weird Vein Psychers basically were like your poor man psychic dudes. And then, getting a bit into it, but then in 9th edition, there were psychic secondary objectives you could achieve and stuff like Weird Vein Psychers, which are good for that because they're super cheap, albeit they were made of tissue paper. So, dead unit, in today's meta. The Astropath, that is basically now part of the regimental attaches. Again, that was like just a weird, like cheap psychic unit. And you can see, yeah, that's right. So Smite was a psychic ability all psychers had. And you had to basically roll 2d6, and I think it was a 5+. You did mortal wounds, but this basically said he's crap. You only roll 1 dice instead of 2, so the chance of getting Smite off was quite low. And there were specific psychic spells for every army. So we'll look at the back in a moment, what psychic spells you had. Okay, Ogrim Bodyguards, Ogrims, and Bolgrams. And basically the Bolgrams have remained the same in the sense they've got a 4+ invul save like today. And at this point, they got an additional 2 wounds, not 1 wound, if they took the Slab Shield. And yeah, so their rule at this point was the Avalanche of Muscle. So you got on the charge, you got an additional attack. So actually you went from 3 to 4 attacks. So that was like on the charge, there was a bonus to do so, versus today, they're just like very good roadblocks. They're very sort of tanky. All right, Nort Dead Dog. And this is cool. He's, where is the Headbutt ability? Yeah, so Thunderous Headbutt had its own rule here. Now you can see again, this is a change versus 10th edition, is you had to do some mental math in the sense, strength 3+, 3 + 5 = 8. You get 4 attacks, AP2, D3, and can make one thunderous headbutt each time he fights. Now he commits basically does a mortal wound, but it was super cool. They had his own. It was like basically a battle cannon shot coming in at you. Rattlings. Again, they have got the move, shoot, move rule. Shoot, sharpen, scarper. Interesting. Okay, then you got, so then it basically has Hellhounds. And then you basically go, Hellhound has got the Inferno Cannon, Devil Dog has got the Melter Cannon, and Banewolf has got the Chem Cannon. That was cool. And I think their rules weren't too bad. And I think also, that's right. So explodes. If the Hellhound, Devil Dog, or Banewolf reduces 0 wounds, roll a d6, adding to the result in the case of a Hellhound. Before moving from the battlefield, it explodes on a 6+, and units within 6 inches suffer d3 mortal wounds. So it's basically pointing to the fact that Hellhound was just this petrochemical tank rolling around. So if it got hit, it could blow up on a 4+, as opposed to a 6. So that was definitely cool and very fun and thematic when you drive it forward. It lasts one turn and get blown up and deal mortal wounds to your enemy. Cool. Right, Armored and Scout Sentinel. And you can see when you look at the different stats, it's basically the similar setup to what it was, what it is today. So slightly less movement, 9-inch versus 8-inch, higher toughness, same amount of wounds, and a different save, 3+ versus 4+. So the Scout Sentinel could Scout move, and again, you can see Scout Vehicle, which is basically Scout move, and the Armored Sentinel had basically nothing else. It was just, I think extra, you could have plasma cannons as opposed to, it can't have it there, and was a bit tankier. Now, before I move on, is that, there were squadrons back in the day. So different units, you could basically field 3 Hellhounds in one unit. And the rules were in this point of 8th edition was they to be deployed together, but then they could split apart. So what it meant, and if I get this wrong, and if you play the edition, is you could basically field 9 Hellhounds. That's 3 squads of Hellhounds, and every unit is up to 3 Hellhounds. You can see you can have multiple Hellhounds. You can have multiple Scout Sentinels, which is the same as today. Yeah, Scout Sentinels can be taken in groups of 3. So 1 plus an additional 2. 1 plus an additional 2. So keep that in mind. Let's look at some other stuff. So then the Heavy Weapon Squad, no change. The Basilisks. And this basically was just loads of shots. Yeah, so you can see Earthshaker Cannon, heavy D6, like today, albeit less shots. Strength 9, AP3, D3 damage. So this edition was more variable damage. Today's edition is more like flat damage. It's just one less thing to roll. But you can see here the Earthshaker Carriage Battery. When you roll the number of shots, you roll 2 dice for the number of attacks and discard the lowest. So that was always meant you got a good amount of shots coming out of the Earthshaker Carriage Battery. Now, no mention of the blast keyword like in 10th edition, where you shoot hordes of dudes, you get more shots. But what you see is what you got. And definitely, I think, I can't remember now, but I do think indirect in 8th was quite common. It didn't feel as overpowered, I don't think. And I can't remember, actually. I can't remember. It's hitting on 4. I don't think there was any nerfs to indirect. The Wyvern, now interestingly, heavy 4d6, and you roll wound rolls. So this actually, I think, did a lot of chip damage back in the day, which was quite nice. The Hydra, heavy 8. Heavy 8. It's bloody awesome. I mean, I think it's rapid fire 4 now, so getting close to the same thing. But 72-inch range, so it's basically shooting anywhere. I think today it's 48. And that's the thing is, in 8th edition, fly keyword units were -1 to hit organically. Now, fly in 10th edition, I don't use any fly units. Definitely feels like they've been cut pretty hard out of the equation. But Hydras at this point were more accurate into fly keyword units. Now, something else as I flick through, I'm just picking up little bits on the rules, is that AP seemed to be not a lot lower AP, and I could be swallowing my words in a moment, but it felt less than it is now. Now, the Manticore, this was a key rule in 8th edition, was that you only had 4 rockets, and you can only fire four times, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4 rockets, you can only fire 4. And that makes sense. But it did mean in turn 5, you had no rockets. And in this edition, you could play up until at least turn 7. I think because once you got to turn 5, roll a dice, you got to turn 6, roll again, and it got harder and harder. But you could actually play games up until like turn 7, I think. So in this case, you'd have a unit which had no main shooters for basically, 3 or 4 turns. And yeah, so that was definitely interesting, and you had to be quite honest and keep track of that, because sometimes you didn't fire a rocket for whatever reason, and you may forget if you fired it or not. To the Death Strike mission, the rules were crap. Basically, you had to roll a d6 in order to even fire the weapon. Now, depending on the round you're in, you basically add it to the dice roll, and then if you've got 8 or more, you can basically shoot the weapon. So the example is, if you roll a 5+ in the 3rd battle round, you get to fire the weapon. So you could basically go through the entire game and never fires. You get to round, game turn 5, you've got to roll a 3. But where this weapon would exceed is against like densely packed units all clumped together, because it gets at a lot of shots. It automatically hits, and it does mortal wounds to the target. So it was just a meme. It never saw any play, and these were briefly good in 9th edition codex, but now they're crap again, which is a shame because they're bloody awesome. Okay, Lemon Rust battle tanks. So you can see all the same weaponry existed. I think the Demolisher Siege Cannon definitely became quite a favourite, because oh, actually, it was only heavy D3. Is that right? I feel like that was changed. Heavy D3, yeah. I feel like that was definitely changed at some point. But that means you had way less shots, but 10 AP3, D6 damage. Obviously amazing. But that, yeah, when attacking units with 5 or more models, change it to heavy D6. Okay, so basically, blast units, like today's rules, you got more shots. Okay. But then I think the battle cannon was decent at this point. Yeah, so the battle cannon, heavy D6 shots, 8 to D3. Now, as I said, a lot of the toughness of vehicles was lower, the strength was a lot lower than it is today. So I think the battle cannon was pretty decent, because grinding advance, you move under half, you get to fire twice. If you're Cadian, you can use the tank order to reroll a number of shots. So it means you get like I was getting at on average about 9 shots at 8, 2, 3. And that would tickle pretty much everything in the game. So quite nice. Another one I call out is the multi-melter. Was only 1 shot. They were quite expensive, but they were just crap, because 1 shot was just pants. Now they're 2 shots, double, so that's great. Okay, the Chimera. Now you can see it's just basically an armored taxi. Not much to report here. Although the firing deck rule of the lasgun array was you can only fire it if the unit's embarked within the vehicle. So the current rules is you can have no one inside it and it shoots, or it can still shoot. But so that's cool. It kind of points to a bit more of a thematic play. I mean, if no one's inside, who's going to shoot him? But interestingly today, it's rapid fire 6, not rapid fire 3, which is cool. God, it's so this is how confusing it is. So it's saying it's rapid fire 3, but you get 2 of them because they're on both sides. But now the rules is just rapid fire 6, because it's just, anyway, they've made things a bit simpler. The Taurox still existed. Taurox Prime, although it can only take Tempestus Scions, just like it can today. Valkyrie, and loads of rules, basically dictating how you maneuver the specific unit, because you could hover, although I think that's no change to what you have today. Then you get page upon page of specific rules for each of the different Baneblade family. Now, this is no different to what you have today, but all that was different at this point was just the super shooter. The big boy blast cannon was the main difference. Obviously today, they've all got their own specific rules, specific abilities. The Baneblade today basically grants cover to units, and other ones do different things, but all that mattered different between these was just simply the shooter. So you can see the Baneblade cannon was heavy 3d6, 9, 3, 3, so a pretty chunky profile. The Bane Hammer was heavy 3d6. And yeah, okay, so it can half the movement characteristics of a unit, so it can't move and it can only half move and advance. So that's just doing the Tremor Cannon, the Bane Sword, which was basically the Titan Hunter. So the Quake Cannon, 14 AP4 D6, and if you rolled a weapon's damage, treat any rolls of 1 or 2 as 3 instead. Okay, so you got a minimum of 3 damage, 2d6, 14. So that definitely was winning everything on 3s in the good old days. Doom Hammer, Magna Cannon. God, so this is, I believe it's a melter, so heavy 2d6. If you're in half range, roll 2 dice with inflicted damage with it and discard the lowest result. So you can see as we've sort of gone through that like AP4, AP5 was pretty tasty. Or to be fair, it's still very tasty. It's quite rare. Right, there's the Stormlord with lots of shots. Heavy 20, so getting at loads of damage to shots. The Storm Sword. This was heavy 2d6, strength 10, AP4, d6 damage. So that's almost basically like a massive Demolish a Siege Cannon. Reroll 1s to damage. That didn't feel as good as some of the others. And that's almost it. So then it's got all the weaponry, and you can see again, the book was quite confusing. You had all the individual units, and then they could have different weapons. Some were listed, the multiple weapons, but others weren't. So you had to basically come and refer here potentially to check out what does a plasma cannon do, for example, for an infantry squad. So it was a bit confusing, particularly if you're new to the game. Melee weapons, more actual shooter weapons, melee weapons. Yeah, and then there was other war gear. Now this was, I think, compared to older editions, a massive peel back, and obviously this is all gone as well now, but Auger Array, Dozer Blade and Track Guards give you specific extra abilities. You had to obviously to pay more, but like the Dozer Blade, if vehicle is Dozer Blade in the charge phase, add 1 to hit rolls made until the end of that ensuing fight phase. So that's cool. So you can still use Dozer Blades, but they're just for modelling purposes. Auger Array basically was once per battle in the shooting phase, you can reroll a single failed hit roll for a vehicle with an Auger Array. So it was almost like I think it was basically 5 points for a command reroll. So that's interesting. And yeah, as I said, compared to previous editions, like older editions, this is a massive scale back on what it was. Okay, then the final part of the book gets into regimental doctrine. So as I said, it's quite confusing. I remember when I started, I was like, right, I've got the army rule, which is like orders, and then I've got like extra orders that you can do, but then like regimental doctrines are over here. So it's like, why aren't they all together? But anyway, so Cadian, Catagen, Valhallan, Vestroyan, Mordian, Scions, Talaran, and Armageddon all have an extra thing. So at this point in 8th, these felt pretty good for what they were. Now, Cadians, if you kept still, reroll 1s to hit. Catagen Jungle Fighters. Infantry, get +1 to strength, and get +1 to leadership if near an officer. And vehicles can reroll the number of shots. So that was definitely one I used a lot in the back end of, in the beginning of 9th edition, was number of shots on vehicles. Valhallan, you basically round up the number of models that flee. So again, the way the rules worked at this point is that you would lose models to failed leadership tests, and basically less would flee. Vestroyan was +6 inches to heavy or rapid fire weapons that would normally fire 24 inches or more. So for example, the key thing that benefited was a plasma cannon. A plasma gun went to 30 inches. Armageddon, basically you got like Armor of Contempt. Talaran allowed the basically vehicles don't suffer the penalty to hit rolls for moving and firing heavy weapons. So I forget what that was, basically heavy weapons, but I think if you move, they weren't as accurate, but that ignored it. And then you have Mordian parade drill, which was if every unit in an infantry unit was in base-to-base contact with one other model, you get +1 leadership and +1 to hit rolls made if that unit was firing Overwatch. So a super cool sort of like fluffy aspect, but I think in the scheme of 8th edition that wasn't that powerful, unfortunately. Yeah, and I think also Overwatch in this edition was for free. You could do it as many times as possible, but only against charges. This thing against into the shooting phase, in the movement phase, didn't exist. Now, stratagem. So again, I remember as a new 40k player, I was just like, oh my god, like what do I even look at? Because there's just so many. But you had specific ones for armies. So you can see here Acadian. Yeah, basically this page was specific to the regiment you're playing, and these were generic. Now, a lot of these, I remember just looking and thinking, oh, and how on earth do I remember all these? But I think one I remember was you could Overwatch on a 5+ for 1 CP, which definitely helped. You'll see Inspire Tactic still exists today. You can issue an additional order. There was Go Recon. You can do additional movement on your Scout Sentinels. And Vengeance for Cadia was a real sort of just a staple. So if you're playing anybody who was Chaos, when you shoot or fire Overwatch, reroll failed hit and rune rolls for models in that unit. So that was just awesome because you basically like use it on, say, Tank Commander pass kitting on 2s or 4 rerolls to hit and to wound against all Chaos units. So that was very powerful. Yeah, so I won't go through these. There was a lot. But as I look at these, carefully eyeballing some of them, they're all relatively still in existence today, which is pretty cool, albeit with a different sort of zhuzh. Overlapping fields of fire, that still exists today, but you can see it's basically boosting accuracy, not AP. And then we get on to the Psychana discipline. So this was, again, specific rules for each army that had Psychers. They had specific things here. So definitely the one I remember playing was Psychic Barrier. So you get +1 to the unit saving throw, and Night Shroud was basically -1 to hit. And things like Gaze of the Emperor, basically draw a straight line, 2d6, and basically any enemy units within that straight line suffer a mortal wound of 4+. Then there was Psychic Maelstrom, which this was cool, was you pick a unit, you have to cast it on a 7+. You can see it's a 7+ to cast that one, a 6+ to cast that one, and basically rolled a 2+. The unit suffered a mortal wound, a 3+ to suffered a mortal wound, 4, 5, and 6+ suffered a mortal wound. That was super fun to play. But definitely Guard weren't an army that were great in the Psychic phase, but just having a single Psyker sometimes was quite helpful, and definitely these two ones you could obviously be quite powerful. But from memory, yeah, so you could either... Yeah, you could only take 2, that's right. You basically declare what psychic spells you're taking into the battle, so you can only choose 2. And I think I used to often take like that one and that one, for example, or those ones if you just want to do damage. So that was cool. All right. Okay, now on to Halums of Conquest, aka relics, or what they call enhancements today. So won't go through all of these because we've been going for over an hour. But the best one that was definitely used was called the Relic of Lost Cadia. So again, Cadia models. The bearer can unveil this relic at the start of any turn. Until the end of that turn, you can reroll hit and win rolls of 1 for all Cadians within 18 inches of the bearer. You can instead reroll all failed hit and win rolls for those units until the end of the turn if targeting Chaos units. So this was awesome because you basically pop it quite early. Everybody's within 12 inches of the bearer. Within, not wholly within 12, so that's a 24-inch bubble, your entire army. And if you're playing against Chaos, you've got 1 turn, 4 hits, 4 hit rerolls, and 4 wound rerolls, which was absolutely amazing. So again, certain matchups that could just be devastating for your opponent, obviously. You can see a lot of like specific weapons. I think most of these are basically gone from the current sort of layout, but these are the relics. And then you get into Warlord traits, and you can see it's just like there's a lot to digest because there's a lot here. I think these were generic ones, and these were again locked to the specific regiment. So you can see the Cadian Superior Tactical Training. So on a 4+, they can issue an additional order to Cadian units. Catagen lead from the front. When it performs a heroic intervention, after enemies completed all its charge moves, they are within 6 of all enemy units. The Warlock can move up to 6 inches before Origin Interventions is at a 3. So you know, basically represent the fact that the Catechins are, you know, proper punchy boys. But again, you can see some of these feel, you know, Grand Strategist. This in this edition was at a 5+. You got CP refunded. Master of Command. They can basically issue orders or an additional tank order. And you can see there's a lot here to sort of go at. So a lot of specific ones from a fluff point of view. And then in this edition, just like in all other editions for 10th, is everything was individually costed. Yes, you had the base cost, and does not include war gear. Then you had to basically bolt on the war gear. So 10th edition, everything just costs, it's all baked in, making it quite easy for newer players. But then for the more experienced of us, it's then like you are sort of pigeonholed in the sense that if you take Tank Commander Pass, for example, you're going to give him a Demolisher Cannon, you're going to give him the multi-melters and a Las Cannon because they're the best shooters. So they have obviously simplified things a lot, and I do think overall the game is a lot easier to play. But definitely, all tactical objectives, again, you could play specific ones for Astra Militarum, is that definitely, you know, compared to 10th, this was a lot more complicated, albeit, I don't know, I felt like, yeah, I think 9th was even more complicated. 8th felt complicated to me as a new player. But then as you look, I think where it was harder to navigate was individual units had less rules, but then you just had stacks upon stacks of additional rules on top. And then we'll do another review in a couple of months maybe. Is an additional book came out after this, 2 books where you got specific Cadian extra rules, then you got specific custom rules for regimental doctrines, and also Scion rules. So I remember going to tournaments, like early tournaments, with like 3 books. You had this one, you had a book for the Cadian new rules, which was literally 3 pages of a new book. Then you had rules for the Scions, which is like 2 pages of a new book. So there was a lot of like layering of rules. But you know, I can't remember how this book did in 8th edition. I think it was pretty good for a while. The conscript spam was a real thing, but I think it dropped off pretty quickly. And if you play competitively in 8th, let me know, because I was new into the game at this point. I'm still very, very sort of junior in my experience, but a great book. I mean, if you enjoy lore, this is just, you know, you sink your teeth into all this reading. Like, I'm not massive into lore. I prefer audiobooks. I don't have the time anymore. Never had the time to read. A bit lazy potentially, but this book had loads and loads of information if you want to understand the history, the story, the lore of Astra Militarum. And definitely, I think from an absolute number of units, we're probably similar, but I felt this was a lot. This felt like a lot of stuff to get through. Now, I think we've been speaking for over an hour, but then again, 8th edition was firmly a game which was very complicated. Like, you know, a lot of rules to absorb or to understand, individual points, extra rules, the psychic phase, like loads of stratagems, and definitely it feels like a simpler game now in 10th edition, partly obviously because we've only got one rule set being the index. So hopefully interesting, a blast from the past, albeit only recent past. But if you're a veteran player, hopefully it was a bit of nostalgia going for it. Definitely for me, seeing the Castcraft Jackals, which inspired me to use my current paint scheme for the last 5 years, is really lovely to see. And then hopefully, again, if you're a veteran player, it's cool to see all these old rules like Grinding Advance, you know, Brutal Strength from the Jungle Fighters for the real shots, that type of thing. And if you're a newer player, it's cool to see an old book, isn't it? So, hopefully enjoyable. Let me know what you think. If you played this book in the older days, let me know what your nostalgia moments are. And if you want to support me and my channel, you can do so with a like, comment, or by subscribing. Joining my Patreon platoon if you're feeling super generous, or simply watching any of my other YouTube videos. I cover everything from hobby, the lore, sort of like this, and also tactics from a competitive standpoint. And just watching any of my videos really helps me as it boosts the YouTube algorithm. Massive thanks to my current supporters. Let's get your bayonet sharp, let's go oiled. Faith for the Emperor strong. Patreon platoon, sound off.
Tank Commander Glenn. Tank Commander Watchdog Van Etten. Tank Commander Mitchell. Lieutenant Burke Nielsen. Lieutenant Smith. Colour Sergeant DuPont. Sergeant Adal, Scott, the Colonel Merrill, Veteran Gibson, Hall, Lundeen, Guardsman Beard, Coquelin, Flint, Hills, Malik, Nitton, Nguyen, Tom, Tompkin, Conscript de Paz, England, Evan Gunn, Gillian, Goodwin, King.